Hello, my name is Sheila Spiegel. I am a student at Hawaii Pacific University. I am currently enrolled in their English bachelor's program and their secondary education master's program. A couple weeks ago, I was interviewed about my education program, what we were learning, how the process goes. I mentioned that something that's part of my education is we are learning about the history, pioneers, and the philosophies of education. Well, I noticed that an opinion piece had come out about my interview, and this writer chose to state that they deemed it worthless to learn about the history, pioneers, and philosophies of education. As a teacher, my only job should be to teach my students specific skills and knowledge. And if what I'm learning isn't teaching that, then there is no point in me learning it. I understand this is an opinion piece. However, I felt very offended by this and decided I'd like to enlighten this individual and others who probably agreed with the piece why learning about the history, pioneers, and philosophies of education is vital for a teacher. So for a teacher to be effective in teaching children and adolescents, they first need to know what it means to be a teacher, what a teacher is. And the best way to learn about that is learning about the history of education, the cultures we draw from, the pioneers who have tried different ways of learning, who have found more effective ways to teaching children younger or older children, and what those are, and the values that they gain from that. These all go in towards making me a better teacher when it comes to teaching my students. The opinion piece writer saw this teaching as worthless. And to be honest, if I was to look at every single thing I learned in college and say what will and will not apply to me or apply to my students or stuff I will teach my students, to be honest, most of the material is too advanced for them. And I wouldn't teach them the material. I wouldn't teach them a lot of this knowledge. That being said, what this is doing for me, it's preparing me to be a better teacher by learning more knowledge, by being able to analyze text, by being able to find the textual readings, which is the basic readings, the subtext, which is the readings that's kind of between the lines, the information between the lines, and then metatextual. What is exactly what the author is trying to get across in his writings? This information is vital for me to learn so I can then teach my students to be able to analyze their own writings. But honestly, half the material I'm learning in the class, my current classes, are going to be too advanced for the students. But that doesn't mean that material is worthless because I can't apply it directly to the students. Learning about the history, pioneers, and philosophies of education is not for the benefit of the students. It's the benefit of the teacher. By making a better teacher, I can then be a better teacher towards my students. So as I was discussing this, I decided to do a little research, find specific cases that I think would really apply and open people's eyes onto why I find learning about this vital. So first, about the history of education. Education has been around for thousands of years, but very few people actually know where that education came from, how it developed, how it grew, and what it currently is today. So, for example, Greek education, which occurred from 1600 BC to 300 BC. That education system taught us the value of listening to, memorizing, reciting, analyzing, and debating texts and readings and writings for literacy. This is still used when it comes to teaching English today. Even at elementary level education, the teacher will say, well, what did Spot learn whenever he ran away from home? I mean, very basic. There's pictures, there's small words, but it asks a child to think, to analyze what they took from that text. This is still applied in our education systems today. If you look at medieval education, which occurred in 500 AC to 1400 AC, so a lot more recent than the Greek education, that education system taught reading, writing, arithmetic, liberal arts, philosophy and theology, crafts, military tactics, and chivalry. It also established universities as institutions for higher education learning. Prior to this, any higher education would have been paid out of your own pocket and done with a privatized tutor. Here, these were actual institutions that students could go to better themselves and further their education. These are just two examples from history on the changes of education. And I feel that's personally very valuable. And then you tie in the pioneers, the people who actually sat down, looked at children, analyzed the way they learn, analyzed their ages. And they're like, well, this is what they should be learning. So you have like Johann Comerius. He rejected corporal punishment by stating that children weren't inherently bad. It used to be children were punished all the time because there was a belief that they were bad and you had to punish that out of them. He instead hired teachers who were kind and caring and who respected children and would create engaging and happy classrooms for these children. And then he also identified the different stages of development. For example, he identified you have infancy, you have toddlers, you have childhood, you have adolescents and young adults. And each group is organized to the extent of what knowledge they can take. For example, I'm not going to walk up to a 4-year-old child and expect them to be able to read a whole book. It's unrealistic. However, I'm not going to go then walk up to a 15-year-old student and expect them to only know how to count single-digit numbers. They should be more advanced than that. Their brains are more developed at that point. So he identified these stages, which is used in our curriculum today and is broken out even further into grade levels. And those grade levels have certain criteria of curriculum they're supposed to teach that applies to a student's mental development at that age. And you have Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi. So his was ideas and lessons that are part of the elementary education system and encourages cognitive and effective learning. And in other words, that sounds all fancy, but in others, what it means is he said that young children learn by exploring their environment, by having fun through songs, through stories, through play. Children learn through play. And this has been applied into our elementary education system where children learn by coloring in a word they like. My young daughter, she learns by having pictures of different things. And she needs to color in the ones that start with the letter of that day. So let's say she has the letter P. Well, there's 5 pictures up there. And let's say it's pizza, it's an octopus, it's a pie. Let's say then we have a kite. And then the final one could be, I don't know, a pineapple. She will then go through and she will see what the pictures are and she will say what the word is. And if the word starts with P, she colors it in. It is fun for a child. They are learning through pictures, but they're hearing the words and being able to recognize the sounds that start the letters, or start the names. he also applied this to special needs students. He was actually the first pioneer out there who thought that special needs students need to be taught too. And that is part of our education system. We have special needs classes and special needs teachers who are specifically taught to teach these students. And we teach all kids. It is part of our education system. He also opened up schools for the poverty, for the poor people, and he invited students to come. And if those students weren't able to eat breakfast that day, he would feed them. Before they'd come to class, he's like, oh, you didn't eat? Allow me to make you food and I will feed you. That is applied into our system today. We feed our children breakfast and lunch at school. Yes, depending on the income of the family determines how much the child pays or if it's free, but we feed our children because we understand it's vital that these kids get food, not only to learn, but to grow. These pioneers are part of our education system. They're vital to our education system. And then historically, I'm sure you're wondering about the creation of the United States education system. Because America used to not have public schools. We didn't. The first person who proposed a public school system was Thomas Jefferson. Now, his bill wasn't passed, but he believed in boys and girls should receive a free elementary school education at the bare minimum. Now, once a student finished elementary education, at that point, his bill only proposed that males, were able to further their education. His bill was not passed, but he was the first person who came up with the idea of a public school system. Then you have Horace Mann. So Horace Mann is considered the common school leader. He is the one who mandated elementary schools to become public and a requirement for all students. And then he connected elementary schools to secondary education schools, and then from secondary education schools to colleges. He organized all the funding. He organized the fact that schools are run by the state and the funding is covered by taxes. He organized the fact that school board officials had to be elected in, and that schools could only be staffed by educated teachers, not just the run-of-the-mill Jack or Jane, actual educated teachers. And then he also said that schools had to be free from the control of the church. So it was be available for everybody to go to. It wasn't based on your religion. This led to our public education system today. These are my pioneers historically of our education system. First, Thomas Jefferson, who introduced the idea, and then Horace Mann, who actually made the idea possible. Then we move into philosophies. So there are 5 philosophies of education: idealism, realism, pragmatism, existentialism, and postmodernism. So what these essentially mean: idealism is a subject matter curriculum that focuses on the culture's great and enduring ideas. Realism is also a subject matter curriculum, but it focuses on the arts, humanities, and sciences. Pragmatism, I'm sorry, I have very big issues with that word. This one focuses on the use of the scientific method to solve problems. Existentialism focuses on classroom dialogues. It stimulates awareness of other individuals and self-concept through choices. And then postmodernism is a democratic criticism and social change to empower demographic groups. In other words, its use is to teach kids to question and to reason and to analyze on their own in order to empower others. These 5 philosophies of education are vital. Yes, it may not seem like much to a student or to a parent, but for teachers, it's important to know what philosophy we follow so we know what type of education we need to go off of. For example, I am considered existentialism and postmodernism, meaning that I believe that children should question, they should reason, they should analyze, they should discuss. They shouldn't feel restricted. I also believe it's extremely important that they reflect on themselves, that they sit there and reflect on the teacher's teachings, reflect on how an essay worked for them, reflect on a discussion they had with other classmates. I feel it's more important for the child to become an individual who can work with others. This is important for me to know because by identify my philosophy, I know how to organize my classroom, how to organize my curriculum, to teach my students and to teach them effectively. Now, if I didn't know this and I thought, oh, well, I'll just go off of somebody else's education standards or someone else's education concepts, I could be basing my ideas off of someone who believes in the use of the scientific method, or someone who believes in idealism and focuses on each culture's great and enduring ideas, but doesn't explore other cultures, just focuses on that culture. It's important for me to know what these are for my benefit so I can help my students. And then it also matters so I know other teachers. I need to know that the teacher next door to me her philosophy is idealism. That's important to know because then I know that I can't just walk up to her and say, oh, well, I let my students do this in class. And she might get offended by that. Or vice versa, I could be offended by how she teaches her class. But by knowing this information, we can not only learn from each other different ways of teaching, but we can respect each other and our different methods of teaching. What works for one teacher may not work for another. And I could also apply that when it comes to my students. What if I have a student that just doesn't really work well with my method of teaching? I can then go to my coworker and say, hey, I think this student would do better on your method of teaching. Can you please teach me so I can teach my student? So my student learns and isn't being left behind. So while I can respect the fact that this writer wrote his opinion piece disagreeing with me, I can also respect the fact that I disagree with his opinion piece. It is vital to make me a better teacher, to learn about the history, pioneers, and philosophies of education, so I can apply them in my own personal teaching methods, so I can be more effective for my students. It is vital that I know how the Greeks influenced our education, or how the medieval time period influenced our education. It is vital that I know that Johann Comerius, I'm sorry, I'm not good with foreign names. It is vital that I know he's the first one who rejected corporal punishment and the first one who introduced a wide range of hands-on learning for elementary school students. It's vital that I know Johann Pestalozzi is responsible for coming up with the idea of an elementary education system that encourages effective learning for students. It is vital that I learn he's the one who came up with the idea of teaching those who are identified as special needs. It's vital that I know he's the reason that school systems teach those who are considered in poverty and who feed the students who don't get the meals at home. It is vital that I've learned how my school system today was developed. Who influenced it? Thomas Jefferson proposing it to begin with, and then Horace Mann making it a reality. I could see these changes. I can learn from these changes. And then when it comes to knowing about the philosophies, I learn about myself. I learn about my fellow coworkers, my fellow teachers, and I can also learn about my students and how they learn. It is necessary for HPU to teach the histories, pioneers, and philosophies of education to all the students who are aspiring to become teachers. Because HPU's job is to teach me so I can in turn teach others. And they're going to teach me to the very best of their ability so I can do the same for my students. So I can be that effective teacher that ensures my students get the specific skills and knowledges they need to succeed. That is what I need to do as a teacher. And learning these things is going to help me do that. I really appreciate you listening to me. I really do appreciate having this opinion piece that I was able to further someone else's knowledge on why it is vital that I learn what I learn. Thank you, and I appreciate you for all your time.